I'm going to re-implement this blanket library that is programmed in Ruby, which I found is a handy library that provides a simple interface for making HTTP requests. When working on a project that only needs to interact with a limited amount of API endpoints, I prefer using Blanket since it's a minimal code base. Say like rather than depending on these kinds of gems that provides every endpoint for the API, then by all means use that gem, but if I only need a handful of endpoints, I generally go with something like Blanket. Also, using Blanket in the console can be a convenient way to experiment with API requests and get a better understanding of how an API works, especially when you're first getting started with a new API. It's just a good tool for receiving quick feedback, useful way to explore the API documentation and see how the different endpoints, headers and parameters are used in practice. Now let's just take a look at what it's capable of, since that's the most natural way to get a feel for it. So let's check out these docs here, and it says we'll run gem install blanket wrapper. Then run IRB and require blanket. And we will initialize a blanket wrapper instance, which must always take in a base URL. And this gives us a GitHub client so we can make requests to GitHub. So let's take a look at the docs and, for instance, get a user. So this is the request we want to make, and this is the response that we will be getting. So here, if you take a look here, the users is the fixed path and the username is the param path. Meaning it can be dynamic, right? Because everyone has different username. So what you can do here is that the fixed path corresponds to a method and the param path corresponds to the argument to the method. And because it's a GET request, as you can see here, what we do is append GET to it, and I'll just assign that to a response variable, which returns a blanket response object. So you can do things like grab the login, grab the public repos, etc. Right? Different endpoint for GitHub. How about this one here? So we'll grab issues for this particular repo. Repo name, blanket, issues.get. Returns a blanket response object, which is an array of issues, and in the array there'll be 8 open issues because by default it returns the open issues as well as the open pull requests. Just a personal preference, the way we made the request before, I'd rather change this to something like this. Reason being is I like to have the parameter paths as arguments to the method. So I like to do this, however, Blanket doesn't support that. So when I re-implement it, I'll make sure that would be possible. Alright, let's try out a few more examples with the Twitter API this time. So we'll need to initialize a Twitter client with the base URL and also passing in headers which include the Twitter API key. And let's do a few user lookup requests. Yeah, which is all working nicely. The get method for Blanket can also support passing params. So not only you want to make the get request, but you want to pass it params like so. Blanket also supports, post, patch, delete requests. So let's try an example with post request. So we might want to like this tweet right here. So what we can do is we can do something like this. So yeah, you're just chaining the method as it is, and then you're calling post, which takes in a body, and we have to convert it to JSON and pass it the headers of content application JSON. And if we go over here and refresh it, we can see that it's been liked. This is really cool, but however, I think when I re-implement it, when you pass it a body, I think we'll just call toJSON as a default inside the post request, and also we will set a content type of application JSON as default for the post request as well. So first I'll use Ruby 3.02. Bundle gem blanket. cd into blanket. I'll git add this, git command-m. this will create a Ruby version file. I'm just going to add in a reload helper method for the console, which was inspired by this blog post here. So I'll add a link to that just above right here, like so. So git add, git commit. Beautiful. Alright, just need to make sure it's all wired up correctly now. And we're ready to rock and roll. So first off, let's define the wrapper spec. So this initializes the wrapper class with a base URL, and we should be able to access that base URL through like an attribute reader. So let's test it first. Create a wrapper file. Don't forget to require that. Create the module in the wrapper, and we'll create an initialize method which takes in a base URL, and we'll assign an instance variable to the base URL, and we should probably create an attribute reader. So now let's try that again, and that's the first step done. I'll add a commit message. I won't be the most descriptive, but just something like that. Cool. A module helper method so that we can initialize a blanket wrapper instance directly from the module blanket. So something like this. I'll delete this because I don't need that anymore. And we can also delete this. Let's run the test. Undefined metaprogramming for blanket module. So what we should do is go here, and we'll define a like a class method sort of thing, although it is a module method. This will take in a base URL, and then we can say wrapper.new base URL. That should do the job. Lovely. Now we can add this, git commit. Let's add a few more specs for the wrapper class, particularly this method missing. So this spec testing for method missing has a few contexts. So let's check out this extracts fixed path parameter path context first. So we have this fixed path users and a param path of username. And we can make this correspond to this method called here. The thing is that the wrapper instance doesn't have this method. So what we can do is intercept this with method missing. And from within there, we want to create an array like this from this data here. And it's the exact same story here. It's just a different username. From this data within the method missing, we want to create an array like this. And what we want to do is assign that to the endpoint attribute for this wrapper instance. Now we don't have an endpoint attribute, so we'll have to also implement that. So I'll add a quick spec here for that as well, because the wrapper should be initialized with an empty array first, so that we can work with that. Now let's check it out in the context for extracts, fixed path, and multiple parameter paths. So here we got fixed path and multiple parameter paths here. And that's how we make the method call like so. And within the method missing, that will intercept it, and we want to create an array like that from this data. Yep, an exact same story here as well. From this data, we want to create something like this and assign it to the endpoint attribute. Now let's also check out in the context of extracting a mixture of multiple fixed paths and parameter paths. So as you can see, you got a fixed path, param path, and a fixed path, right? And the way it works is a little bit different to the previous ones, is because you're making this method call first, and passing the param paths as the argument, and then you're making another method call which doesn't exist on the instance of wrapper, right? So we want to make sure that this returns self. Otherwise we'll be calling issues on, nil or array, just depends what it returns. But from this data, we also want to create something like this. So let's get to that. Here you get the first error here, and it says undefined method endpoint, so we better define that. Endpoint equals an empty array, and we'll make that into attribute reader. Try again. Beautiful, now that passes. So now it's saying that undefined method users, which we don't have. So what we can do is define a method missing. See if that does anything. Alright, so that's progress. Wrong number of arguments given 2. Some are given 3. Okay, so what we can do is, so when there's a method missing, it takes in, this method will be a symbol to the method that you called. And you can do args as well, like this. And I'll do a binding.pry just to have a good look at what's actually going on. So method C, so users is a symbol, and args is an array. And in this case, we're only passing one argument, so that's what we get. We can try for a few more. There we go, it's a different case. Yep, so in this case, we passed it 2 arguments, so method missing is able to place all those arguments to the args variable. Yeah, I think you get the gist with that, so I'll get rid of this now. So what we can do is we can shovel the method name into the endpoint array first, which is progress, because now, we got that, but we don't have the argument. So what we can also do is endpoint args is an array, so we're just going to shovel it in. What we can do is concat, use the concat method and place the args. Run it again. Beautiful, so it works for everything except this last one. And this is what I was saying before, so it says undefined method issues for this array, because the trouble is that this is returning an array, and then we're calling the method issues, which doesn't exist, and it's applying it to the array. So what if we do self here, that should fix all the problems. Beautiful. I'll add this, git commit message, something like that. Done.